have a tutorial for you today on one color brioche. So I think two color brioche gets a lot of the attention. A single color brioche has a nice look and I think is a good starting place for beginners. So this tutorial is geared toward beginners. That is to say, people who have not knit brioche before, but are familiar with knitting and purling and the basic knitting stitches. So I'm going to show you how to work the one color brioche both flat and in the round. I think that brioche, it uses some abbreviations that make it look more complicated than it is, because at the end of the day, you really are still just knitting and purling. So this is just a quick little brioche sample. You can see that it is the same on both sides. It is very squishy. It is very stretchy, but it doesn't pull all the way back in like a traditional ribbing. So this is definitely a decorative stitch rather than a functional stitch, in that it doesn't really have the structure to create a cuff that cinches in or a neckline that cinches in. It is really just for the looks. So some brioche basics. It is a very loose stitch. So for brioche, you generally want to go down a couple of needle sizes. So this is a worsted weight yarn. I would probably normally knit this on a US 8 and I am using a US 6 for the brioche, and you can see that that looks nice, and it's not a super stiff fabric, but it's not too loose either. The other thing is that brioche uses a lot of yarn because you are essentially taking 2 rows to work 1 row, because you are slipping every other stitch and then knitting it the next time around. This also means it can be a little slow. However, once you get into a rhythm, it moves pretty quickly. You just won't see your fabric grow as quickly as you would with a traditional stitch. So I've just done a quick sample here of some brioche, and then I've worked a couple of rows of stockinette so we can start from the beginning. If you are working brioche flat, you are usually going to be working it over an odd number of stitches. Just makes it look very even. And if you are knitting it in the round, you would usually be doing that over an even number of stitches. So I am going to go ahead and work just 1 row of ribbing to get us set up with our knit and purl stitches. So for brioche, you are essentially working a 1x1 rib. It's just extra fancy. I've gone ahead and worked just 2 rows of a plain 1x1 rib. You can see what the difference is, so that we are ready to start on the right side. So as I said, I am just working the first 2 stitches in a garter as a border for us today. That's not something you normally will need to worry about. So the first stitch I knit like normal, and then the next stitch is what's called slip 1 yarn over, which makes it sound complicated. The next stitch is a purl. I'm going to bring the yarn forward as if I'm going to purl. I'm going to slip the stitch to my right needle without working it, and I'm going to keep the yarn here before I knit the next stitch as normal. And what that does is create a little scarf for my purl stitch. So again, working brioche flat, we're going to work across, knit 1 normal, slip all the purls with their little scarf. So again, that means bring the yarn forward, slip purlwise from left to right needle, leave the yarn in front when you knit the next stitch. And that is the first row. And we do that all the way across. So like ribbing, knit one, purl one, but we're slipping all the pearls, and before we slip them, we give them their little scarf. Just like the other kinds of knitting stitches, a knit one purl one rib, a 2x2 rib, you will develop a muscle memory and just be able to get into a rhythm with practice. All right, now we're on the wrong side. So my first 2 stitches are my border. Now, because we're working flat, we do the same thing every row. So again, we're going to slip all of our pearls with their scarf, but this time the purl is the first stitch. Then when we get to our knit, because that was the purl on the right side with its little scarf, it has a little scarf, and we knit the scarf and the stitch together. So it's the same thing. We slip our pearls, but we're also knitting our knits with their scarf. So we're going to do the exact same thing again. So again, this is called slip one yarn over. This is often abbreviated as BRK, B-R-K, which means brioche knit. And that, I think, makes it sound scary. It's not. You're just knitting, but you're knitting both of those together. Knit. Now, sometimes you will get to your knit. It should have a scarf, but there's no scarf. Where's the scarf? It's just at the front. So you just pick it back up and pop it on there. So again, slipping all our pearls and knitting all our knits. Okay, slip one yarn over. Now we're back on the right side. So now on the right side, you will see that every other stitch has a scarf, and this is how it's going to look going forward on both sides. And again, because we're working flat, you're going to do the same thing on every row, whether it's right side or wrong side. Now we're starting with our knit. It has its scarf, and we slip the pearls with the yarn in front, leave it in front, knit the knit stitch with its scarf while making sure the yarn is in front with your purl. And that is really it. Bring the yarn forward, slip, keep the yarn forward, knit the knit stitch together with its yarn over. And again, because we are working flat, you do the same thing every row, slipping the pearls, knitting the knits. The only thing that's changing is which one comes first, because we have an odd number of stitches. Right? And so now we're on the wrong side, but it looks identical. The only difference is the first stitch in our pattern is a purl instead of a knit. Let's talk about how it's different if you're knitting in the round. To do that, as you can see, this is a flat swatch. I don't have it in the round, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work one more right side row, then I'm going to pull the yarn behind my swatch to simulate working in the round. So instead of working this way and then working back across the stitches, I'll pull the yarn behind, and after working the right side, we'll be back at the start and we'll talk about how it's different in the round. All right, I've worked to the end of my right side row. So now, as I said, I'm just going to pull the yarn across the back so we can pretend that we are working in the round and starting again at the beginning of the round. So now our purl stitches are the ones with the scarves, and our knit stitches need scarves. So when you are working flat, you slip all the pearls on this side, then they become knit stitches on the wrong side. So the pattern is the same. However, if you are working in the round, it's opposite. And you have to do one row of slipping the knits and purling the purls, and or excuse me, one round, and then the next round of knitting the knits and slipping the purls. So my knit doesn't have a scarf. That means that on this round I need to do the slip-one yarn overs with the knit stitches instead of the purls. It is the same. Okay, so we want our knit stitch to have a scarf. We're going to bring the yarn forward. We're going to slip. However, this time, because the next stitch is a purl, we have to bring the yarn forward in order to purl. So once we've done the purl, however, our yarn is already in front and we can just slip that knit stitch to give it its scarf. Then we bring it back around. The purl has a scarf. Now, this is sometimes abbreviated affectionately BURP, BRP, brioche purl. It's the same thing as with the knit. You are just purling the purl stitch with its scarf. That's all it is. It's nothing different. It's still just a purl stitch. So yarn forward, slip the knit, bring the yarn around to purl the purl stitch with its scarf. Now our yarn is already in front. We slip our knit, yarn around to purl the purl. We're going to do that all the way across. Again, you are going to be able to get into a rhythm with this with practice. Okay, so those are just my edge stitches. We don't need to worry about those. All right, let's, again, pretend we're working in the round. So we're going to bring the yarn back to the top of the row. And now this row, let's get our edge stitches out of the way here. This row is going to be what we have been used to, in which we are knitting our knits with their scarf and slipping our purls. Okay, bring the yarn forward, slip our purl, knit the knit with a scarf. Yarn forward, slip our purl, knit our knit with a scarf. So when working in the round, you will alternate on one row, on one round, you will slip one yarn over all the knits and brioche purl the purls. And then on the next round, you will slip one yarn over all the purls and brioche knit all the knits. But again, oops, it is nothing different. You are just knitting and purling. So you can see we are still creating that same squishy double-sided texture. So that is the basics for your one color brioche, worked both flat and in the round. And now I want to show you one more technique for creating the brioche stitch, but I really only recommend it for when you're working flat. So let me get us set up here. All right, so I've got one more method to show you how to create the brioche stitch without all of the yarn overs and special abbreviations. So there's one special abbreviation. And again, you can do this when you're working in the round, but especially for a beginner, that is more complicated. And if when you're working flat, just like the flat technique we've already learned, you're doing the same thing every row. So let's knit my first two. All right, and so to do this technique, we are going to knit all of the knit stitches into the row below, and we're going to purl all the purls like normal. And it's the same on both sides. So to knit into the row below, normally you put your needle here. To knit into the row below, you're going to put your needle here into the middle of the stitch below the stitch on the needle, and you're going to purl like normal. So knit into the row below here. Normal purl, knit into the row below. So normally your needle goes here if you're going to knit. In this case, you find just the little hole This is the stitch below. This is the stitch 2 stitches below, 3 stitches. So right a stitch below, you're going to put the needle in there and pull it through like a normal stitch. Okay, so that's what we do all the way across. Now we're on the wrong side. And we just do the exact same thing. So we knit our first 2. And we do the exact same thing. Our first stitch is a purl, we just purl it. Our second stitch is a knit, that was a purl on the front side, so we just purled it normal. Now we're going to knit into the row below. This is sometimes abbreviated K1B. Okay, now we're at the end of our wrong side row. We turn it over. You can see it looks the same. There we go. Same kind of squishy stitches. Now your tension may be different if you use this technique as opposed to the other one. That's normal. But the stitches essentially look the same. You can see my tension is a little looser for the knit one below technique, but the essential stitch looks the same. I don't recommend doing this when you're working in the round, especially for a beginner, because in that case, like we saw with the other technique in the round, you've got to do 2 different things. And that is on the first round, you knit 1 below, purl 1. And on the second round, you knit 1, purl 1 below. And first of all, purling into the stitch below is a little bit, fiddlier. But more importantly, it can be hard to tell which one you're supposed to do. So with the regular brioche technique, you can already see which stitch has its scarf and which doesn't. And so that's easy to see. But if you were trying to do this, you have to look down below to see. So right here, these knit stitches are the ones that I knit 1 below on the back side. So on the front side, it's very hard to see. You can kind of see he looks like he's wearing 2 scarves. So I know that I need to knit the knit stitches below on this row because my purls are already wearing 2 scarves. And the same would be true if it were the opposite. It would look like my knits had 2 scarves. And I would know that I needed to purl into the row below. But for a beginner, that's really tricky to see. So I don't recommend working into the row below in the round for a beginner for your brioche technique, but I do think it works nicely working flat, and for some people it can be just comes more naturally to them than the slip 1 yarn overs and the birks and burps. All right, so just for demonstrative purposes, I have worked to the end of my right side row. Now let's pull the yarn behind the back as if I were going to be working in the round. And on this, in this case, I know that I would have to purl into the row below and knit my knit stitches normally. So if I were going to do that, I would knit, then I would have to purl. Let's see, it's a little trickier. So the needle goes behind and underneath that bump to purl into the row below. Right in here, that's where you would do that. But how can you tell? It's very tricky. I can see here that my knit stitch kind of has 2 scarves. Right there. Here they are in the back because I just did that on the back. So I know that I don't need to knit into the row below. My purl stitch only has 1 scarf. So he needs to be knit into the row or purled into the row below. So there's the little sort of extra scarf coming in here, right there. And so that's why we know I don't need to work into the row below. But it is very tricky to see, especially for a beginner. It's hard for me to see, and I've been doing this for a long time. Now, of course, you could just remember always work 2 rounds so you never end up in that situation, but life doesn't always work that way. You know, sometimes we get interrupted. So all our best intentions, maybe we want to say, I'll always work 2 rounds so I can remember which one I'm on, a knit below or a purl below. But sometimes we can't control our own time and it doesn't work that way. So yes, you can do it this way. Edge stitches here. In the round, you can see, looks the same, but especially for a beginner, I would recommend, if you want to do the working into the row below technique, to stick with doing that flat for now. All right, friends, there you have it. That's how to work your basic one color brioche, both flat and in the round. If you found this tutorial useful or helpful or educational, I hope you will give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. New knitting videos here every Saturday. Thanks for joining me for today's video, and I will see you soon in another one.